Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live Facebook event brought to you by KUNC Public Radio, the NPR affiliate for Northern Colorado, and the Colorado Sun, a Denver-based news organization that covers all of Colorado. I'm Jennifer Brown, a reporter and co-founder of the Colorado Sun, and I'm joined by KUNC reporters Michael DeYuana and Ray Solomon. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hi.
Glad to be here.
Great. So we're here to talk today about something most people didn't even know was happening until the story of Elijah McClain, who was a 23-year-old Black man who died in a confrontation with Aurora police. Paramedics gave McClain a dose of a powerful drug called ketamine, and officers used a technique called a carotid hold on him. That was meant to calm him down, but McClain went into cardiac arrest and died 3 days later. His name is now known across the country as part of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it turns out that the use of ketamine by authorities in Colorado happens a lot, more than 900 times in the last 2.5 years, according to an investigation by Michael and Ray. So Michael, before we get into this whole discussion about ketamine, remind us all the story of Elijah McClain's arrest and his death, please.
Yeah, he was walking home. I think a lot of people know this story, but for those who don't, and for those who do, maybe there's some details that they didn't know about. He was walking home at night from last August from a convenience store. He was wearing a ski mask and apparently dancing. And somebody called 911. This is in Aurora. And said that he looked sketchy. Well, the police pulled up in their cruisers, they found him, and they said he was acting suspiciously. He told them, he was just going home. He asked to be left alone, but police grabbed him. They eventually brought him to the ground, and like you said, they did use a hold on him, a carotid hold. They handcuffed him, and then a medic came and sedated him with ketamine. He went into cardiorespiratory arrest, and that was only just, like a few minutes after he'd been given ketamine. And several days later, he was taken off life support. And since then, his story kind of went, his story was kind of unknown for a while, and then the Black Lives Matter marches began, and Elijah McClain's name came out, and that's what led us to look a little deeper into what had happened in his case.
And I think, Michael, you said at another time I heard you talk that what happens next with ketamine is going to be part of the legacy of Elijah McClain.
Right.
Ray, can you tell us what is ketamine? And Elijah weighed about 140 pounds, and talk about how much ketamine he was given in relation to his body weight.
Yeah, so ketamine, I think a lot of people know about it sort of colloquially as like a party drug or, horse tranquilizer. That was sort of how it was in my mind. But, it's important to know that it's a pretty common drug. It's a dissociative agent. That's what doctors call it. So it kind of creates this, out of body experience, dissociating your mind from what's going on. And with ketamine, it's really important to note the dose because it has really different effects at different doses. It can be at a very low dose at 1/10 of a milligram per kilogram. It can be a very useful, really effective antidepressant. And then it's also used as pain relief, analgesia. That's around 1/4 of a milligram per kilogram, up to 1/2. And then if you get up to more like 1 to about 5 milligrams per kilogram, then we're talking about anesthetic. And around 5 milligrams per kilogram is when it starts to, that's what anesthesiologists in a hospital setting will use to induce general anesthesia. And then we know that, so you mentioned Elijah McLean was 140 pounds. That's about 63 kilograms. So if you do the math, that comes to he got almost 8 milligrams per kilogram, which is, is quite a bit. That's definitely up in the general anesthesia range. and not on the lower end of that. And also it was given, it's important to note, it was given in the field. It wasn't a hospital setting. Doctors weren't able to do the sort of normal, protocols that they would do in the hospital. We don't know, the autopsy was inconclusive about ketamine's, effect on him in relation to his death. Like, it was inconclusive about whether his ketamine contributed to his death. Maybe there was an unusual reaction, something like that. And, we don't know, but we do know that he was given a very high dose, higher than protocol for, what paramedics were supposed to do. And obviously not in a hospital setting.
Right. I mean, they can't weigh him, for example. They're guessing.
They're guessing, but I mean, they really overestimated. If you do the math out, they're estimating that he's over 200 pounds and he's 140 pounds. That's pretty way off, right, in terms of estimation.
Yeah, and that seems to be problematic in all of these cases, is that medics are put in a position where they're going to have to guess someone's weight. And that can lead to giving them the wrong dosage.
I want to ask you guys too, let's direct this at you, Michael. The Aurora police say that McClain was experiencing something called excited delirium. So what does that mean? What is excited delirium?
Yeah, and I think that that's really the heart of this story and the detail that a lot of people have been missing. Many people think that this is some people have been reacting to our stories and thinking it's a story about ketamine. Ketamine is the problem, but it's more complicated than that. It's about excited delirium, really. And that allows a medic to sedate someone. Now, what is excited delirium? It's considered a very rare medical emergency. And according to a guidance to EMS workers from the state, it's when a person develops symptoms that include extreme agitation, aggressiveness, overheating, and maybe even exceptional strength. And these are symptoms that could not otherwise be managed through physical or other medical techniques. So that's when medics step in. Usually it's the police who are the first ones to encounter a person with these symptoms, so the medics can step in and sedate someone. And we were told by the emergency doctor for Denver Health, who in one of our stories, that think of it this way: it's when a person is essentially so agitated, so overheated, their heart is racing, that they are in danger of exercising themselves to death. And that's where ketamine comes in, because it's a very fast-acting sedative, and according to emergency doctors, and that can prevent a person from, basically puts them out and prevents their body from going into a crisis, and in some cases it can prevent them from dying. So that's what medics said that Elijah McClain had. Now that's very controversial in his case, it turns out.
Maybe could you explain that, Ray? I mean, did Elijah McClain have excited delirium? What's the evidence there?
I mean, we weren't there, so we can't certainly diagnose him, but he didn't appear in the body cam footage to have any of the symptoms, or, pain tolerance, sweating, being overheated, exceptional strength, and then of course like the agitation and delirium, like you don't know what's going on, you're not aware of your surroundings. And he didn't seem to have any of that. He was talking pretty coherently to the police. He was asking them to give him his space. He was telling them that he was trying to listen to them, but he had music in his earbuds. I mean, he sounded like he was responding. He sounded coherent. And then we talked to Dr. Mark DeBard, and he was kind of the the doctor, the emergency medical physician who he basically defined or helped define excited delirium for emergency medicine back in 2009. And we spoke to him. He watched the videos, and he said that it doesn't appear that Elijah McClain had any of those symptoms. When he said at first that it was just, unequivocal, he didn't have excited delirium. He watched the video, and ultimately what he told us is that, when the police first encounter Elijah McClain, he does not have excited delirium. There's just no way that he does. And then, but maybe at some point during the encounter, he might have developed it. But also that's kind of based on what the paramedics at the scene were saying, or what the police officers were saying, rather. They were saying, oh, he was doing a push-up with 3 of us on his back. They said, he's, some other things that suggest excited delirium, but we don't see that on the body cam footage. Like, the body cam footage is kind of in the grass. You don't see it. And it's kind of, so if he developed excited delirium during the encounter with police, it would have been because of the encounter with police, and we don't see it. That's based on police officers' descriptions.
And we should also add that the family, in their lawsuit against the city and first responders, are adamant that he did not have excited delirium by any definition.
Yeah, and then the other thing to note is that, excited delirium, it's usually caused by someone who's on drugs like cocaine or methamphetamines, or sometimes it can be the result of like a psychiatric disorder, or like withdrawal from psychiatric medications. And Elijah McClain he wasn't on drugs. There was some marijuana in his system, according to the autopsy report. That's not associated with excited delirium. There no cocaine, no methamphetamine, and he didn't have, as far as I know, he didn't have a psychiatric disorder. So he didn't have any of like the precursors or the risk factors. So it certainly seems like he didn't have excited delirium. I'm not a doctor. I wasn't there. I'm not going to give a diagnosis, but that's certainly what it seems like.
But you were able, I heard one of your reports, to hear the voice of a man in a different state who clearly had excited delirium. And in that radio segment, I believe you guys compared that voice to what Elijah McClain was saying and doing during his arrest, which sounded much different.
Yeah, in Elijah McClain, one of the things is you might not know who you are or where you are. And if, just based on those two criteria, Elijah McClain is saying on the body cam footage, my name is Elijah McClain. He's telling first responders that he cannot breathe. And he's also saying that he was just going home. So he seemed to know exactly who he was. And where he was going and where he was. So those would not, according to the definition of excited delirium, be excited delirium. Also, it's worth saying again that he was handcuffed when he was given ketamine to sedate him. So the question arises there, well, why couldn't they have just put him into a police cruiser if they were going to charge him with any crime, and then just go from there instead of sedating him?
Right. Go ahead, Ray.
Just another, to add to this, I think one of the most common features of excited delirium is imperviousness to pain. And he seemed to be crying out in pain. The carotid hold, they did a hold where they put their knee on his tricep to sort of separate the muscle from the bone, which is really painful. He responded to that pain pretty clearly. So, there are just a lot of symptoms of excited delirium he just really does not seem to have.
Right. So as a fellow journalist, I'm really curious about how you guys put this story together. And I'll mention too, if there are people on listening to this event, if you have questions, just go ahead and leave them in the comments and they'll make their way to me. But in terms of the behind the scenes here of your project, how did you go about finding out that there were more than 900 doses of ketamine given in Colorado in just the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jennifer, that was the first question that came up. I mean, we were, okay, so this has happened to Elijah McClain. How often does this happen? What are the numbers? What more information can we provide the public with? So we went to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, which collects data from medics who sedate people for excited delirium. Turns out they track that, and we basically wanted to know everything. You know, when people were sedated, how many, where they were sedated, which agencies were involved, whether there were any complications, you know, basically everything short of the names of the people sedated, because we assumed their names would be considered private. But we were ultimately denied our request on the grounds of confidentiality. So, so we negotiated with the department, and we've been able to get information from them along the way as we've been working on our stories. You know, we've been able to, and what we've done is we've reported that information as quickly as we've been able to, given the ongoing Black Lives Matter marches, possible questions about safety that we've uncovered in the process. In addition to 902 people being sedated in the last 2.5 years, we also learned that almost 17% had a complication in the field, and 10 to 20% resulted in intubations in the hospital. So those are pretty serious things, you know, and those numbers immediately got the attention of doctors. With the Colorado Society of Anesthesiologists, for example, they're concerned about how ketamine is being given in the field. So we've been working as we're able to with the Department of Public Health and Environment, understanding that they have concerns about confidentiality, but we also have concerns about public safety, and we want to get as much information as possible to the public. So it's been a bit of a tug of war, I guess. But they have been giving us some information in bits and pieces, and that's allowed us to continue reporting on this.
And really, aren't all public records requests a tug of war at the end of the day? It always seems that way to me. But
Yeah.
Through this work, Ray, you guys found out that there are about 100 agencies across Colorado. These are like EMS services and fire departments that have state permission to give out doses of ketamine. So how do they get that permission? And does it come with, you know, responsibility of reporting how many times they use it? I mean, what do they have to tell the state? Like if they harm someone, it sounds like that was somewhat in the data that you received.
Yeah, so the permission goes through this is like a waiver program. So normally, you know, only doctors would be allowed to administer ketamine, but the state administer or gives out these waivers that medical directors, those are doctors that oversee all these paramedic agencies. The doctors apply for a waiver, and that allows them to take responsibility for it, and they can deputize their paramedics to be sort of like, I mean, it really is like deputization, like they can extend their privilege as doctors to administer this to their paramedics. And it's, you know, it's important to note that it's paramedics who are administering this, not just, you know, not EMTs. So there's like a, you know, a higher level of expertise required. And so these waivers are given out to, like I said, the medical directors. And each medical director is responsible for putting together his or her own protocols and training programs. So it's not like centralized. It's not like everyone is, you know, going by the same standards. Like every doctor develops their own, and the state provides some guidance, but each doctor does their own, and there's definitely some variation in the what different doctors require. And then there's this board, it's called the Emergency Medical Practice Advisory Council. or MPAC for short, and that's made up of emergency medical physicians, and they basically review these waiver applications. So in the waiver application, the doctors put, if it's a renewal, they put their numbers from the previous time period. They explain, their rate of complications, and then they also put together their proposal for the ongoing protocol and training. And then the the MPAC board, they review those applications and they recommend to the state whether or not to approve it. And that's sort of done at this day-long, excruciatingly long meeting. It's, technically public. I think this year, because it was on Zoom, might have been the first time people actually showed up that weren't on the board or, directly related.
And Ray was there for every minute of it.
It was like a 10-hour long.
It was long.
Yeah, so I can tell you just from being there that it was kind of a chummy group. Like some of the doctors who are getting waivers are also on the board that's approving them. And if they're applying for a waiver, like I just want to make sure it's clear they're recusing themselves from the vote. But they know each other. It's kind of a chummy situation. It didn't really seem like everything was approved. Every application was approved. Some of the applications were approved with like, oh, you need to make a change, but it wasn't like, you did this wrong, so we're not approving it. It seemed like a pretty routine approval process. So in terms of the reporting requirements, every time the doctors or the paramedics rather administer ketamine, they have to report certain things. It's like which agency is giving it, because the same doctor will oversee like multiple agencies in some cases. So you have the agency that's administering it, the date, the age of the patient, their weight. There's a question like, did the patient meet protocol or not? I mean, what does that mean? But they pretty much all say that they do meet protocol. And then what's interesting is they have to put the suspected cause of excited delirium. So if it's like psychiatric or drug related, the dose, whether there were any complications, were they admitted to the hospital, how long they stayed at the hospital, whether, did they have to be intubated at the hospital? So the state has all that information and they just haven't given us very much of it yet, but they have kind of a treasure trove of information that would really let us, evaluate how this program is being used if we could get our hands on it.
Mm-hmm. And are they saying, Ray, that in all 902 cases, the person had excited delirium? And what did you find out about, is it that prevalent in the world that does it make sense that many people had excited delirium? I think it's controversial, right?
Yeah, so, okay, that's a lot. Let's back up and like unpack that question. The first question about whether all those patients they're saying had excited delirium. And yes, that's what they're saying, because it's not just a waiver for ketamine. I should have made that clear. It's separate waivers for ketamine for different use. So there's a waiver for ketamine for excited delirium. There's a waiver for ketamine for pain relief. And there's even a separate one for, it's also used to help sedate patients so they can be intubated if they need that. So there's different waivers for all of them. And that 902 number, that all came from waivers for excited delirium specifically. So, unless they're really messing things up, presumably those are all, they're claiming excited delirium. Now, you asked how often it should be used, I think. And that's a really tricky question. Like I mentioned before, we spoke to the doctor, Dr. Mark DeBard. He's based out of Ohio. He's retired now, but back in 2009, like I said, he was the chair of this task force that defined excited delirium. And he sort of did some math based on a study of excited delirium prevalence that came out of Los Angeles in the 90s. And he basically came up with a number. It should be, like Michael said, it's a very rare medical emergency. It should be happening around the rate of like 1 incidence per 250,000 people in the population per year. So if you do the math, in Colorado, it should be about like 57 cases per year. And we're obviously see. Oh, no, I'm sorry.
57 cases over the 2.5 years.
2.5 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Of our 902 cases, there should have
Right.
only been 57.
Right. So that's nearly 850 cases that presumably, based on this prevalence rate, were overdiagnosed. And then you asked about, it is a controversial diagnosis. It's something that a lot of the American College of Emergency Physicians recognizes it based on that white paper that they wrote in 2009, but other medical institutions don't. The American Psychiatric Association does not recognize it. That's the group that they put together the DSM. That's like the Bible of psychiatric disorders. And we spoke to the Dr. Paul Applebaum. He chairs the DSM committee. So he's like at the head of the committee writing this DSM. And he was just unequivocal that he does not recognize this as a psychiatric diagnosis. He's never seen it. He thinks it's, seemed to think that it was used as a control measure. And he was very alarmed by this being a diagnosis at all. Michael mentioned the American Society of Anesthesiologists and the Colorado Society of Anesthesiologists. The anesthesiologists are alarmed at this. It's not something that they recognize. And then a lot of, I think, criminal justice reform advocates, they'll say that excited delirium is a fake diagnosis that the police use in order to, after the fact, explain why someone has died in custody. And it's like an excuse that they don't have responsibility. It's like putting the responsibility on the patient because excited delirium can be fatal. So it's like, oh, we didn't, the police aren't responsible. The person had excited delirium. They're sick. They were responsible for their own death. And I think that the truth, just from what we've uncovered, it really seems like it's somewhere in the middle, right? It seems like it's a legitimate diagnosis. The psychiatrists aren't seeing it. The anesthesiologists aren't seeing it because it's an emergency medical condition. So it's really only like people in the ER who are going to see this. Psychiatrists just aren't going to encounter it. And just because of the extreme agitation, the extreme exertion, people do die from this. And ketamine and other sedatives can be life-saving. They can just bring it all down, just calm a person down. But it's clearly being used way too much in, at least in Colorado and presumably elsewhere in the country. And if it's misdiagnosed and if ketamine is given, more too casually, that can also be fatal. So it's a very controversial diagnosis, but it does seem to be an important diagnosis in very rare situations.
Well, and I would think, if I was being arrested, I would probably not act like my normal self,
That's true too.
Undecided. Yeah. So I have a question that's coming from the comments. Someone's asking, do paramedics with a critical care endorsement have to report, when they give ketamine, or is it just under their scope of practice?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. It is under the scope of practice of certain paramedics with a higher certification. So we can't get information on that, presumably because they have this critical care certification, presumably they are better at using it, but that's absolutely true. That's they wouldn't
need a waiver. So
they wouldn't waiver, so they wouldn't need to report through this waiver program.
They're not going to be in the data that we have. Although, we've kind of been back and forth on this, how many medics might be out there with that kind of certification or that level. And it's kind of a toss-up. There might be a lot of them, or there might just be a handful. I mean, you could think of some possibilities, maybe people in the military, for example, or in the National Guard. But on the other hand, would they be in situations where they are responding to help police dealing with someone who might have excited delirium? And maybe the answer to that is no, but again, we're not sure. So that's one of the blind spots in our reporting at the moment.
Yeah.
So during your reporting, Michael, you did come across some other people who were given doses of ketamine during their arrest in Colorado, and they did not die. And tell me about some of those stories. What did you hear from them?
Right. So, I mean, the thing about Elijah McClain is we can't talk to him. We can't ask him now what was happening. So we looked for other cases, and there were two men that we found. One of them is also named Elijah. His name is Elijah McKnight, and another man named Jeremiah Extel. McKnight is, he's multiracial and identifies as Black, and he'd been out drinking with his friends, and Arapahoe County deputies found him on his own, lying down at a bus stop at night. And they came up to him, but it looked like they were kind of doing a welfare check. And he became defensive immediately. I mean, it's pretty clear that he's still a little inebriated, and he admits that in retrospect. And he told the officers that he didn't want to give them his ID, and he wanted to call his father. Kind of like what you explained just a second ago, Jennifer. You might not. You might be a little agitated when the police come up to you, and certainly he was. And there was this back and forth that went on for a little while, where he's like, I just want to talk to my dad, and can I make a call? And the one officer reaches out, tries to grab him, and then he turns and he makes this really kind of lame attempt to run away, and he doesn't get very far. The police tackle him. But then the situation just super escalates from there. They use a taser shock device on him. He's screaming at that point that he's going to comply with them. They get him handcuffed, and then a medic comes and starts asking him a series of questions like, how many quarters are in a dollar? And he says 4. Who's the president of the United States? And he says Trump. And they ask him his name. He at one point he says to the medic, please help me, get me out of this situation. At another point, he overhears them saying that they're going to give him ketamine. And he says, don't put anything in my veins. Whatever you do, don't put anything in my veins. Well, they do it anyway. They sedate him. They give him not just one shot of ketamine, but 2. And he winds up in intensive care for several days, intubated. And he in our interviews, he said that he felt that was it way in excess of what needed to happen in that situation, that he was already handcuffed, and that police could have, if they had problems with him, they could have simply arrested him instead of him winding up in a hospital bed. The other man that I mentioned, Jeremiah Extel, he'd yelled at his neighbors in Lakewood over their trash, kind of upset, and they called the police on him. And the situation basically ended with him on his girlfriend's front yard, sitting cross-legged, at one point even lying down, wearing handcuffs, which were causing him pain the way they had handcuffed him. And this is all documented by video by his girlfriend. She's an attorney, and she happens to be a member of the Lakewood City Council. And so she's documenting all this, including when, he's yelling at police as he's handcuffed, kind of talking back to them, snapping back. But, he knows who he is. He knows where he is. And at one point he says that he's going to 100% comply. So he gets up from his cross-legged position and walks to the middle of the street where there are these police cruisers, and there's also a fire medic truck there. And he gets onto a gurney, and then they sedate him with ketamine. And he wakes up, he doesn't even know where he is. And there's a couple of police officers, and first thing he says is he wants to go to the bathroom, and they tell him that he's already been a couple of times. You know, I think this comes back to the definition of excited delirium, which is that medics should give ketamine if routine physical techniques don't work. And so, like Elijah McClain, these two men were already in handcuffs. So I think that that raises some concerns, and it certainly did for these men to say, you know, that they had gone through being sedated, and some of them were experiencing both are experiencing kind of, I don't know what the word is, sort of some trauma or you know, some lingering emotional effects from having been sedated like that.
And can I just jump in and say, like even if, so it doesn't seem that any of those people, Elijah McClain, Elijah McKnight, or Jeremiah Axtell, it doesn't appear to me, to, you know, to us, that they had excited delirium. But I just want to point out that even if they did, that's not, you know, especially McKnight and McLean, they just, the protocol, the whole, the behavior of the police and the medics just doesn't follow what, you know, the advice is. You know, you don't handcuff, you don't like restrain them. I mean, the way that McClain was restrained is just goes against all the advice for treating excited delirium. It's sort of like the idea is to contain the person rather than restrain until they can be sedated, because you don't want to excite them more. The more you excite them, the more you restrain them, the more likely they are to overexert themselves and die. So even if they did have excited delirium, which it doesn't appear that they did, but even if they did, it was just not handled the way that you should handle a case like that.
Yeah, you want to imagine, you know, if somebody has excited delirium, that they might be running back and forth, you know, and so the idea is, according to Dr. DeBard, would be to surround them as best you can to contain the situation. And if you did need to handcuff them, you know, it would be a possibility, but it wouldn't be advisable, because you really just need to get to that person, you know, get a shot of ketamine to them very quickly, and that should act very quickly to sedate them, and then to bring them into the emergency room where they can receive care. And, you know, I think another thing worth pointing out here is that both Jeremiah Axtell and Elijah McKnight are facing criminal charges. And, you know, that raises the, I guess that raises some question about, well, if this was a medical emergency, then why are these two men being charged criminally? And we still have some reporting to do and to get some answers regarding that question.
That's a great point, Michael. And the one of the comments on our Facebook Live here reminds me of another question. Can you tell by this data that, from what you've been allowed to see, are they keeping track of whether the person was handcuffed or whether the person had already been tased by the time they give the dosage of ketamine? Is there any way to know?
That's not reported to the CDPHE. That's just not part of the reporting questions. And kind of the only way that I think we could get at that is if we'd have to, you know, contact people. We'd have to go like case by case, because there's no centralized reporting on that type of thing.
So I always think they should let the reporters help decide what's being tracked, because how many times have we asked for something and the answer is, oh, we don't track that part of it.
I like that idea.
Data is lost. So
yeah, I mean, like we know that McClain, McKnight, and Extel were all handcuffed because of the body cam footage. But if we don't have body cam footage, if we're not like speaking to the people individually, there's just we don't know. We wouldn't know.
Right. So some good news of this whole conversation that we're having is that amid all this public scrutiny, including your reporting, this is now under review. The State Director of Public Health has launched a review of the use of ketamine. So Michael, tell me about that. What are they actually looking at? How are they doing this?
Yeah, the department's executive director, Jill Hunsaker-Ryan, so far, she has declined to sit down with us for an interview. We've asked a few times now, and we want to talk about the review, but we also want to talk about some of these other issues that we like what kind of other tracking could be possible. We have questions also, mostly right now, though, about the review. It was announced about a month ago, maybe 5 weeks ago, and it's expected to take 3 months total. So it's going to look into, quote, patient safety and program transparency. The result of that is going to be a public report, but there's a lot that we don't know. You know, the department has declined to tell us how the committee will be run, what exactly the committee is going to look into, and who is going to be on it, other than it will be overseen by the state's chief medical officer, Dr. Eric France. You know, for people's information, the committee will include an EMS provider or providers, a pharmacist or a pharmacist's, ER doctor, anesthesiologist, and quote unquote others. So I don't know who those might be, and nobody does, other than the State Department of Public Health. You know, so as we're looking into that, I should add that you know, the review, since the review was launched, we've continued to report. And so, you know, like Ray was talking about earlier, those cases of possible misdiagnosed excited delirium, and as many as, you know, 845 cases, that's a lot of people who may have, who may have wrongly been given ketamine. So for sedation. How much are we going to find out about those cases? That's what we really want to know, and we want to know if that's going to be part of the review. But we don't really have any indication as to what they're going to look into and what that final report is going to, you know, what direction it might point to in terms of recommendations, or whether there will be any recommendations or changes. And meanwhile, there's a lot going on outside the review. For example, the State Society of Anesthesiologists, they want a suspension in the use of ketamine for excited delirium as this review takes place. But we haven't really gotten an answer as to whether the department's taking that concern seriously. So there's just a lot of questions surrounding this review.
Right. And while this report is happening, meanwhile, Aurora, for one, has suspended the use of ketamine by its medics. Have any of the other, 99 or so agencies done the same? And is the city of Aurora going to wait for this state report, or what's going on there, Ray?
So the city of Aurora, they've suspended the use of ketamine, not just for excited delirium, but for all uses. So like I mentioned, they also use it in the field for pain relief and intubations. And so they've suspended ketamine for all uses in Aurora until there's an independent investigation that the city of Aurora commissioned into the death of Elijah McLean, including protocols EMS protocols and the use of ketamine. So when that report comes in, that's sort of the, Aurora suspended their ketamine program until that report comes in. So not the state report, but their own independent.
Their own report. There's so many reports flying around. We should say that. There's investigation over investigation.
Yeah, exactly.
Another audience question for you guys about this. Does the state health department have rules on what the composition of this investigating group has to be? I mean, would it maybe be required to have members of the public, or this person suggests a reporter to be on the team?
Michael,
I love that suggestion. That's actually a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that. It immediately makes me want to do a little more digging in the direction of finding out something about public meetings and state open meetings law, because I think that's where that question is rightly headed, is, well, can the state have a review committee that operates completely behind the scenes and has a group of committee members that are not even named publicly? So I think that is a serious open records, open meetings kind of question that would fall under the Colorado Open Records Act. Some of my experience in past stories would say that the meetings should be open to the public because, and I'm going to get a little bit into the law here, I may be wrong, but I think I'm right, because they are creating a work product. So thank you for that question, because you've given me new hope to fight for information on this. It's a great question.
Right. And of course, the counterpoint to that, being a cynical reporter, is they could claim that they're discussing individual cases if they are, and try to keep us out of it. So we'll have to see. So we almost have to wrap up, but I'm going to rephrase one last question, if you guys can answer it quickly, from somebody who's listening right now. They want to know about the case that Elijah McClain's family has filed. And maybe Ray, can you just talk over, what are their main points, I believe in their federal lawsuit, correct?
Yeah, so there's a number of defendants listed on that complaint, from the police officers, even the medic who administered ketamine, and the medical director, Dr. Eric Hill, who oversees the waiver program for Aurora Fire and Rescue. I mean, just a lot of their, trying to find accountability from a number of different people. Like Michael mentioned before, they're contending in this lawsuit that Elijah McClain did not have excited delirium, right. That instead he was murdered. They call it murder. And what else about the lawsuit do you think is important, Michael?
Well, what you said, they maintain that Elijah McClain was murdered.
Yeah. And
that he did not have excited delirium by any definition, because there's more than one definition. There's this, and there's the American AECP, the American Emergency College of Physicians, which is a national group that represents 38,000 emergency room physicians. They kind of put a definition out there. The state's definition is more or less the same, but by any definition, they're saying that Elijah McClain did not have excited delirium. Therefore, he should not have been given anything to be sedated in the situation that he was in. So the suit what's interesting about this suit is, in addition to police brutality and naming police officers and naming the city, it also, and I haven't seen many cases or that have done this, it also names a fire rescue agency, Aurora Fire Rescue, and it's medic and a doctor, as Ray was saying, Dr. Hill, who oversees that waiver program. That's something new and something interesting to see. What is essentially a police brutality case and a civil rights case in federal court that also names people with a fire agency and people who are normally in the medical side of things. So I think that that's what's really unique about the lawsuit.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael and Ray, for your great public service journalism. It's really one of the best projects I feel like I've read all year in Colorado. So thanks for what you do. And thank you everyone for joining us for this joint conversation between KUNC Public Radio and the Colorado Sun. Michael De Joanna and Ray Solomon are reporters at KUNC Public Radio, which is the NPR affiliate for Northern Colorado. You can follow them at kunc.org. I'm Jennifer Brown. I'm at the Colorado Sun, which lives at coloradosun.com. And all of this reporting is published by both outlets. KUNC has a great page on their website that you can catch up, read, listen to all of these important facts. So thanks for joining us every day or today, and have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Bye.